Hey, welcome to another Guileless Man podcast episode. I'm Scott, here with Pete.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey Pete, so today we wanted to talk about a possible triggery type topic. So this is kind of the trigger warning, just in case anyone's a little sensitive. So today's episode, we wanted to talk about toxic masculinity and kind of what that means and how that compares and just how that plays a role in today's world, you know, specific to men. And so with doing some poking around recently, so Wikipedia on the Googles. So Wikipedia says toxic masculinity is thus defined by adherence to traditional male gender roles that consequently stigmatize and limit the emotions boys and men may comfortably express while elevating other emotions such as anger. And so I think there's a lot of kind of specific definitions of toxic masculinity and what it means, but I think it's generally the idea that men aren't allowed to show those aggressive emotions that are often, you know, considered toxic, you know, aggressive. I guess, you know, I might as well read it here. Another article here, Scientific American, says that some of the traits and behaviors of toxic masculinity include suffering pain in silence, having no needs, never lose, show no emotions other than bravado or rage, don't depend on anyone, don't do anything that could be construed as weakness, and never snitch.
And so pretty much they're summing that up as everything visceral about being a man is right. What's toxic.
Yeah. And, you know, I've had a lot of discussions with my wife about this very topic because she's a little bit of a feminist. I think most women are. She
would agree, absolutely.
Yeah. She says that it's definitely a thing. She doesn't think I have it, which is great, but she definitely is, you know, kind of convinced that this is an actual concern out there, and that all men need to be careful that they don't fall into those traits or are doing those sort of things. And it's weird, especially now having kids, you know, having a son myself. You know, I find myself, I don't know. Let me go back. I
know my wife is very concerned how he's going to grow up.
But is she worried that the opposite, that, you know, he's going to revolt against that sort of mentality and become the toxic masculinity?
No, she doesn't worry about that. She really is just worried about how society is going to perceive my son. Like, she needs to make sure that he's as sensitive as he can be and everything so that he doesn't get labeled as a toxic man or something like that.
Right. So, and that's all totally valid. I mean, I've had those discussions with my wife, myself, with my son, who's also 4.5 right now. But I want to go back and kind of think of the times before toxic masculinity was a term. And I'm thinking back to, you know, I think it probably starts developing in high school when you're a boy becoming a man, maturing, puberty, all these weird things are going off in your body as you're developing. And I think that's where a lot of things start, you know, connecting. And that's also where you make a lot of your relationships and.
Well, yeah, it's the time that you're developing into a man.
Right. And
what kind of man are you going to turn into?
And I think a lot of that can be based off of, you know, the group you hang out with. You know, you have the jocks,
Absolutely.
The nerds, the intellects, the theater people. And I think it's probably fair and safe to say that some of those groups might show those traits a little more than others.
Mm-hmm.
And so my personal story, I played lacrosse, I wrestled, never played football, much to my dad's, you know, he was very upset that I didn't. I was a big guy. I was 215 my senior year wrestling, and there was definitely a lot of that I think what would now be classified as toxic masculinity. But I think that's normal at that age to be kind of aggressive, to kind of be finding your place. I have seen the movie Mean Girls, and there's a scene in the in the movie where she comes to the new high school. She's the outsider, and she sees the mean girls, the clique, and she pictures them as a pack of wild, I don't know, lions or something, animals.
And and they start tearing each other apart or something like that.
Exactly. Which is funny now, because thinking about it, is that not female masculinity? I mean, couldn't that be argued as the same thing?
Toxic femininity?
Yeah. Wait,
femininity?
I think we're onto something, but not to get sidetracked. So I think that's kind of where the whole idea kind of starts. And I think it's natural to kind of go through that as a male, from 15, 16, 17 years old, to see a lot of that. I mean, that's the point in your life where you're developing or figuring out your personality and where you fall in the world.
Yeah, while you still have all these hormones firing off all the time.
Right. Yeah, and that's the problem too. I mean, you don't know when you control them or how to control them or what's going on, and so
yeah, you're still learning.
Yeah, and so I think that's why you see a lot of anger and the 18, 19-year-old male demographic, and it's weird. I mean, I don't know if that really exists today, at least in the same way. And that was only 20 years ago for us.
I mean, I would imagine that there are some differences. I mean, sometimes people say, oh, things never change. And then there's other people that say, oh, those are just kids today. And I think it's kind of a mix, like a lot of things can stay the same, but, there are differences in generations and everything.
Right. Well, and I think one of the things that might have changed is the fact that now we talk about it. Back then it wasn't a thing, or it didn't have a label perhaps. And so, you couldn't really take care of it or address it, the same way we can now, where now you'll get called out for it. It'll get pointed out. And, I think that's the big difference is.
And you can even be socially shunned for it and everything.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'll have to see when my son hits that age, what it looks like. I mean, that's not going to be for another, 14 years or so. Mm-hmm. But I'd be interested to see where that goes. But so that's where I think that's where masculine or toxic masculinity kind of gets its start, where guys kind of start developing their personalities and where that goes. And there's so many different, I guess, outside influences that could affect that. I can't speak to too much of it, but like, for instance, my dad, we had a healthy relationship. I've got 5 siblings. I never felt I had to compete with them. I never felt I had to compete with my dad. My dad was never, like, I don't know. I know there's situations out there in families where some fathers may be a little more aggressive than others. I know there were times where my dad lost his temper with us, and we lived in a generation where spanking wasn't frowned upon. So I'll go that far with that part.
Yeah, you just didn't want to beat your kids.
Right. And I mean, unfortunately, I kind of laugh, but I really shouldn't. That is something that happens. And I think obviously something like that plays a big role. We're kind of taught based off what we see from our parents and what our fathers, and we talk a lot in previous episodes about, what we've learned from our dads. And we've been fortunate enough that our dads were really good dads. I mean, they still are. And so they were good examples for us. But I think there's a lot of situations where there's a lot of men out there who either didn't have a father figure as an example, and they had to learn how to be a man off of what they saw in movies or in the media, or, possible.
That's kind of my dad's story, is just like that.
Yeah. I mean, he grew up in a time, though, where media wasn't as violent or as rough it is as it is these days. So he didn't get hit with all that stuff. Mm-hmm. As an example. So I think so us today, so that's where we came from. I was fortunate enough, I kind of got to see the good and the bad. I saw some relationships where fathers were really mean to their sons, and the guys kind of turned out kind of rough. Or I saw situations where there was no dad around, and I could see them getting kind of more and more, I hate to use the term, but, you know, kind of toxic in their masculinity. They kind of felt they had to make up and show what a big man they were, and they'd push people around and they'd bully people. And
yeah, and I actually even had a buddy growing up in middle school and high school, and he had a dad, was fairly involved in his life, but at the same time, like, it almost seemed like his dad didn't even really give a crap.
Right. And it's not to say that that's an excuse to allow a young man to grow up to become aggressive and, you know, kind of that whole have to be a man's man mentality. But I think it's kind of a reason, and not to necessarily have sympathy for them, but to kind of maybe step back and see, well, this guy's really kind of a jerk. What happened? Like, why is he like that? We know now that bullies bully because they're bullied themselves. And I'd go so far as to say toxic masculinity is just a form of bullying. So I don't know. So we as men today, pushing 40, whether we're fathers or single men, we walk that fine line, because there is such a thing as normal masculinity, you know, just being a guy, doing guy things. Mm-hmm. And then there's toxic masculinity, which is the basically being a bully. And mm-hmm. It's kind of that fine line we have to walk. So I guess we've talked about some of the traits of toxic masculinity. You know, what are some of the traits of non-toxic or regular normal masculinity? Like, I think that's important for people to kind of to think about. I think we should just kind of discuss it right here. Regular masculinity is, you know, enjoying things that guys like, whether it be sports or, you know, trucks or, you know, the typical masculine things. And that's not to say, you know, if you don't like those things, you're not masculine. But I think they're kind of things that if you take it too far, then you fall into that toxic masculinity. You know, you can like sports, but once you start yelling and screaming at people like, my team's the best, you know, I could have been a quarterback, you know, and you get stuck in that whole dude bro mentality. I think that's when you start dabbling into the toxic masculinity.
Yeah, and that kind of brings it around to my view on it. Like, what I kind of see as the quote unquote toxic masculinity really is just more of like almost a failure to launch in terms of maturity. Like, at some point in your life, you start to realize that certain things don't matter as much as other things. And in a way, it seems like these toxic men are just still stuck in their adolescence. You know, they're still stuck in those teenage years of their maturity, of their emotional maturity.
Yeah, still trying to prove a point.
Mm-hmm.
Still trying to show. And you know what? I think going back, that's kind of when we're 18-year-olds, we want to prove I'm a man. And this is how manly I am. I'm so manly. So I'm a man. You know, so I used to do commercial framing, construction, home remodeling, and there's a lot of toxic masculinity there. You've got a lot of the construction workers, catcalling the women that walk by and whistling and kind of talking to each other pretty rough. And I think thinking now, kind of what we've talked about just so far in this episode, I think it's that mentality of, you know, I have to show that I'm the biggest man here. I'm the alpha dog. And I think a lot of men feel that in order to do that, you have to out masculine each other.
Yeah, like it's just a bunch of puffing of the chest and a bunch of pissing contests, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly what it is. And I think that's where, maybe that's where that fine line is, can I be a man and not have to brag about how manly I am? Like, can I let my deeds show? So, taking my construction background, if I'm working on something around the house, my wife's asking me to change a light fixture or something, for instance, it doesn't turn into step aside, woman, I've got this. It turns into, well, how do you want to do this? Or where do you want to put it? Or, let me hang it like this. And, I kind of involve her, or a lot of times she just says, just do it and walks away. So it doesn't matter anyways. But, I think that's where we can take a situation where something could be considered toxic masculinity. And really, it's just regular masculinity. And that's not to say a woman can't change out a light fixture.
Yeah, and even you can even go as far as to say something like that doesn't even have anything to do with masculinity and everything to do with, like for instance, in my situation, I have a similar situation with my wife. Whenever it comes time to hang something, I have a much better eye to tell whether it's level or not. So I tend to be the one that makes sure it's level. And I'm better with spatial relations than she is. So I can tell if it's centered to the room or centered to the wall and vice versa. If it's off by too much one way or another, I'm just a little bit better at that than she is. But she's much better at, like, does something even work on this wall, or should it even be in this room at all? Like I don't see that. That doesn't compute with me, but she gets it.
So I think the difference is, listen to you tell that, kind of story there, is when you're hanging something, is it, oh, honey, I'm a man. I can do this better than you. Step aside,
No,
crack your
absolutely
knuckles.
not.
Right.
But to just like an observer or something, like a random observer or a passerby or something like that, maybe they might see us like palling around when we're doing this. Like sometimes Josie will try to hang something up, and I'll just be like, "You silly pants, give me that. Here, let me make sure it's the right distance away from the ceiling, and good spacing and everything." And that's just me joking around with her. I'm not trying to tell her, "Oh, you can't do this." Like, she absolutely can do it. There's nothing wrong with her doing it. It's just we run a slightly bigger risk of it being lopsided.
Yeah. So I think along those same lines, and that's a very fine line that you could be walking. I could
Yeah,
probably,
absolutely.
playing devil's advocate, I could probably see some people saying, wow, you said you can do it better than her. Like, that's pretty toxic, bro. And I know that's not the case, and knowing you the way I do, but so I know personally a lot of the things I do, my wife could do. She just doesn't have the experience I do. So I'm sure she could replace a light fixture. I'm sure she could figure out how to do all the stuff I do. I happen to have a lot of experience in the, I guess, air quotes here, masculine sort of tasks around the house. And so I think for me, a lot of it's just, hey, honey, I've got experience in this. Do you want me to do it? And it's not so much me saying, honey, I'll do it. I'm a male. I can do it better. It's me saying, hey, I've done this before. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, and like the same situation on my side. Like, I'll just be like, "Hey, do you want me to do this? Because I can get it done real fast. Because I've done it many times before." And she'll usually be like, "Oh yeah, sure. Here, do this. I got something else to do." Or other times she'll just say, "Oh no, I really want to figure this out for myself." And then I'm hands off at that point. She wants to learn. Absolutely, go for it, please, by all means.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, obviously that is a good example of that fine line that we have to walk as far as toxic masculinity. But I think it kind of spills out into really everyday life. A lot of things that were considered gentlemanly, opening
Yeah,
the
like
door,
holding the door open for a
right?
woman.
Walking
Yeah.
on the street side of the sidewalk. A lot of the things that were considered gentlemanly, I think, are being, I'd go so far, personally, I'd go so far as to say being misconstrued as toxic. Let me open the door because you can't. it's not let me open the door because I don't think you know how to open a door. You couldn't handle it. It's let me
It's
get out,
it's
go out of my
polite.
way. Right. Because it's polite to do.
Yeah, because it's not even that, you do this, men do this for women. Men will do that, like an actual man will do that for anybody. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah. I mean, I think
It's just when
manners.
sometimes when people see a man holding a door for a woman, they're like, oh, well, he's just, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, he probably would do that for anybody. And did you maybe not even notice the three men that walked in before her that he held the door open for as well, or something like that? I don't know, just creating
Yeah.
random things in my head, but there you go.
Yeah, for sure. I think there can be instances where, somebody didn't see the full picture and they only caught part of a situation and right away, oh my goodness,
Yeah, and that kind
what
of
a
thing
pig.
happens all the time.
Yeah. But I'm thinking more of the stuff that you do on like a date that a guy would typically in the past would have been expected to do on a date. And
Mhm.
I
Like throw
see
your coat over a puddle.
did
I'm not
anybody
doing that for anybody. I'm
did,
sorry. I like my coats.
did anybody ever actually do that? Like I
I
know they do in
think
the
so.
movies, but I don't know that it was actually
In
done. But
cartoons.
right. So like I think we as a society have gotten so carried away with kind of being offended by everything and being told that you should be offended by everything and everybody should be doing everything for themselves, and if somebody does something for you it's because they think you're lesser, and that is a very dangerous line. And this
If
is
anything's toxic, that is.
yeah, well that's a conversation I've had with my wife is, you know if you think me opening the door for you is toxic, then you're welcome to open your own door. If you think me, walking on the street side in case, something gets splashed up or in case, whatever happens, is toxic, or whatever little thing that I might be doing to show that I care for you and that I put you on a pedestal essentially, and I want to take care of you. If you see those as being toxic and you want me to stop them,
Call
I
me
mean,
out.
well, not just that, but at what point are you going to say, "Wow, you don't treat me well anymore. You don't do nice things for me. You don't take care of me. You don't do the things a loving husband or boyfriend or whatever should be doing." And it's it's kind of that double-edged sword where it's
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
yeah, if I do these things, I'm a toxic male, and if I don't do them, I'm a jerk. And so that's kind of the line that we're stuck walking right now. And that's for all men, I think, at this point, is either you're doing things that are typically considered gentlemanly or manlike, masculine, not even, to an extreme level, but you're just doing things that, historically men have done. You're kind of immediately written off as toxic. That's toxic masculinity. How dare you? A man explains something, no matter what level or what they say, that's mansplaining. If a man's sitting in his chair and his knees aren't close enough together, that's man spreading. And we've come to kind of this place where men can't really win. And I get it. It's women's turn. I get all that, and I totally understand that. They want their shot and everything, but at the same time, you can't build yourself up by tearing somebody else down. I mean, that's a saying I've always liked, and it's that same idea where
Another one I always liked. The first time I ever heard it, I fell in love with this statement. Was just similar to your lifting people up thing. Is you can't make the room brighter by blowing out somebody else's candle.
Yeah, I like that one a lot, and that's the whole idea is, we need to be lifting each other up. And that doesn't mean that men need to become the male saviors for women. I see that a lot. And that brings up a whole nother thing. Like I've seen a lot of male feminists, which is totally fine. It is what it is. That's fine. But the problem is when a man starts saying how terrible men are because they're men, it's kind of, to me, that's weird, first of all. But secondly,
it's perplexing.
Yeah. Well, and secondly, I mean, it's that whole, you're not actually first of all, you're not actually doing anything to help anything. You're just saying words that you think people want to hear. But
Yeah, if you're just pointing things out and you're not actually fixing them, then you're part of the problem.
Well, and that's what's funny too is I can think of a few examples where those same people are kind of terrible to their wives. They ignore them. Now that I'm saying that loud, are they just avoiding the masculine traits that they're criticizing themselves, that maybe they were criticized of, and so they just don't do them. And so it's, you lose that sort of male figure, male role when you take it all away, when everything becomes toxic. There's no, I don't know. There's when you find everything is black and white, you can only be extremely this or extremely that. Like you get rid of that gray area. That's
the nuance.
Right. That's when you get in trouble. And that's not to say that, that line can be very thin on a lot of different types of areas as far as masculinity goes. And I think we just need to be careful that we're not lumping all masculinity as being toxic. It's okay to be a man. It's okay to like man things. I think like all things in life, you don't go overboard with it. It's all in moderations. You have to, be able to step back and say, yes, I can be a man right now and do man things and have man fun, whatever that might be. But you don't go over that line. And now it becomes, we're doing men things by putting down women or others, or, finding that fine line that you have to walk between still being a gentleman and not being overly, I'm doing this because she can't. It needs to be, I'm doing it because I think it's something she wants. Again, that's another fine line, oh, she likes this, I think some people with some, issues might go so far as to kind of actually believe their abuse. It gets to a point where, oh no, she likes it when I yell at her, kind of thing. And that's a whole nother topic. And that's super dangerous.
That kind of like the first thought I had when you said that was, oh, he beats me because he loves me.
Yeah. Well, and then you get the victim that falls into the victim role. And it doesn't. That's a whole nother topic that maybe we can touch on. That gets really super sensitive. But before we even get to that point, the toxic masculinity, I think it definitely is something that all men need to be aware of. I think it's probably it's a good thing that it's been termed, that's been called out, that it's acknowledged as an issue.
I just think that they've gone overboard with it.
Well, so just stepping back, I think it's important that it is a thing because now it has made people aware that this does exist. And hopefully, if you catch it and realize where that line is and whether you've crossed it or not, I think that can save a whole lot of pain and heartache. And I think that's, with this whole episode, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, is knowing that thin line between safe and regular masculinity versus toxic masculinity. And it's a razor thin line. But I think it's important for men to realize how they're acting and kind of step out of their skin and try and see themselves. Is this something that is wanted, or am I forcing it? And I think it's important for women to also realize that, what, being a man doing gentleman things isn't toxic. If it's something I don't like, I'll speak up and say something, but, understand that man might very well be trying to be a gentleman. He's not trying to offend you. He's not trying to make you upset or do something because he doesn't think you can. He's probably
just be trying to impress you.
Trying to, very much probably the case, especially, in the younger 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I mean, a lot of college idiot guys are idiots because they think they're impressing girls.
Yeah, I know that was me for sure.
Yeah, I've done my fair share. I think I probably still do stupid stuff, not necessarily masculine, but just dumb stuff now to impress my wife, and it never does. But I think it's,
I feel the same way.
It's important though that we don't take that masculinity away. You know, like you had mentioned at the beginning that you want your son to be able to be raised doing boy things and to be a man. I think that's important. I think boys need the opportunity to become men. They just need the proper examples, and that's not.
Yeah, they need to be taught that you need to just they need to be taught and directed to find their own balance between the cerebral and visceral sides of their masculinity.
Yeah,
because too much of one in either direction is what leads into this toxic realm.
Yeah, and I think that's a good reminder too. Is that I think it's fair and safe and probably important to say that the toxic traits aren't only masculine. I mean, I know we're specifically talking about toxic masculinity today, but I mean, we mentioned Mean Girls. I know for a fact women can be super toxic to each other. And I mean, I've got several stories, my wife alone with situations she's been in. And it's definitely, I mean, that's a thing too. That's probably a whole nother episode. But I think it's
and I feel like we could do a whole nother episode on this too.
Oh, for sure. But I do want to keep it short. We'll keep it simple. Maybe next time we can do a part 2. We can get some more people involved. I'd love to.
Yeah, get a third or fourth person on again.
Yeah, I'd love to see if I get my wife to sit in on it. So we'll see. So for now, though, try and recognize what that fine line is, where you fall in it. Maybe this is a good opportunity to assess yourself and where you are. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this fairly triggering episode. I hope it wasn't too toxic. I hope it wasn't too rough, and I hope it didn't sound like a rambling and it made some sense. But for now, thanks for checking in, and we'll talk to you later.
Take care.